people might have thought that this Taco Bell was haunted because of how many of the employees, young, attractive female employees of this Taco Bell in North Carolina, they were being murdered in their homes. They were being strangled. So we just ended up having a lot of poor young women who ended up dead, and they all worked at the same Taco Bell or another. So that is the beginning of the Taco Bell Strangler. His name was Henry Wallace. So after he graduates, he gets a couple of jobs, the main one being a radio host, right? And he's so fun, he's so likable, but at the same time, he gets fired because he was stealing CDs from the radio station. So he moves to Charlotte, North Carolina, and he starts working at a lot of fast food chains, primarily Taco Bell. So one night after his shift at Taco Bell, he starts driving around the town. So he comes across a woman by the name of Sharon. Now, Sharon happened to be a worker. So he drives up next to Sharon and says, hey, how much for your services? And she tells him the price. She gets into the car. They drive away into like a wooded area so that the police aren't around, and they fulfill the act. But at the end, Henry decides that he doesn't necessarily want to pay her. But in order to get away with not paying her, he believed now he had to kill her. So he ends up strangling her, dragging her out of the car into like the slightly wooded area, grabs a giant rock, and starts bludgeoning her to death. So he bludgeons her to death, just disposes of her body on the side of the road, and her entire family start freaking out immediately. And it wasn't until a little while later construction workers found her body on the side of the road. But there was no evidence, there was no motive, there was no witness, so of course the case starts getting cold. So then we have a woman by the name of Caroline Love. She didn't work at a Taco Bell, but she worked at a Bojangles. Now one day, she ends up now coming in for her shift. Now her sister Kathy also worked at the same Bojangles. She had been off for the past like 3 days because it was her birthday weekend, and when she gets back, the boss is like, hey, your sister was like late one day. She didn't show up the whole day, and the past 3 days, she hasn't come in. So she starts freaking out, rushes to Caroline's apartment. Her roommate lets her in, and she starts surveying the place. Like there was a little bit of tossed furniture in the living room. Like it didn't look like there was a struggle that happened, but just things that were misplaced. Her room was just eerily calm. The sheets were missing, some weird small things were missing. And what's fascinating is that the Bojangles boss said the day that they last saw Caroline, she had asked to exchange a $10 bill for a roll of quarters because she had to go do laundry. But that roll of quarters was missing. But her clothes were still there, so she didn't go do laundry. So she and the roommate, Sadie, and her boyfriend, they all go and they file Caroline missing. And the case had gone cold. I mean, this really stressed out Kathy and everybody else that worked with her, but especially traumatized was her roommate, Sadie. So her boyfriend, Henry, decided, well, you should probably move in with me. So she moved in with Henry. Henry is the Taco Bell Strangler. So he starts dating Sadie, and he really just has his eye on Sadie's roommate, Caroline. So one day when Sadie doesn't notice, he steals the house keys, makes a copy of them, and when he knows that Sadie is at work, he sneaks in with the key that he made, so there's no signs of a forced entry, and he surprises Caroline in her own apartment, and he starts trying to kiss her. Now, of course, Caroline doesn't want to be kissed by her roommate's boyfriend, so he tries to kiss her again, and she says, whoa, like, don't do that, I don't like that. And he says, well, do you want to have with me? I feel like you do. She said, absolutely not. And if you ever try to pull something like this again, I'm gonna tell Sadie, okay? Or you have to tell Sadie. So he gets really mad and decides, you know what? I might as well just like strangle her and kill her. So he drags her into the bedroom where he viciously assaults her. Then he washes her off in the shower. Then he reclothes her, puts her into his trunk, and takes the roll of quarters from her house. He would later dump her body in a nearby ditch, and using that roll of quarters, he would do his own laundry. Then we had Shauna, the Purple Princess. She was working at Taco Bell. They called her the Purple Princess because she loved the color purple. She also had another friend that she would babysit her child for all the time, for free. So that particular day, she was supposed to pick up the child from daycare to babysit him, but she didn't show up. So her mom immediately starts freaking out, calls up her boyfriend and is like, hey, have you seen my daughter? Where is she? I haven't seen her all day. I don't know what you're talking about. So she hangs up on him, goes to Shauna's apartment, and she notices a couple of strange things. There's no signs of a forced entry, but she had left her purse, she had left her keys, she also left her coat. So she calls up the boyfriend again, and it's like, hey, I'm freaking out now. Like, if something happened, just fucking let me know. Like, she's going into mom mode. So he drives on over, and he had realized that in the craziness of this just anxiety attacks that Dee, her mom, was having, she didn't check the apartment. So they open the shower, and Shauna was laying in the shower, and she was dead. The tub was filled with water, so immediately, they pulled her out, they tried to do CPR, it was too late. When they did the autopsy, they realized that Shauna had heavy evidence of blunt force trauma on her head. She also had ligature marks around her neck. Her vocal cords had been injured, which meant that someone had strangled her with such force. So they knew that this is someone that knew her. This was someone who took their time. They put her in the shower, maybe to wash off DNA, maybe to get rid of some evidence. So of course, the first suspect is her boyfriend. But people who knew him said that it can't be him. It just doesn't make any sense. The police also ruled him out for whatever reason. Maybe he had an alibi. But one person that wasn't ruled out, one person that wasn't even looked at, was her manager at Taco Bell, Henry. So that day he had come to ask her a couple of questions about her job. So she had let him in, and at the end of this, they had a nice little talk about work. He went to the door to leave, and she gave him like a hug, like a sideways, very loose, like professional hug. And he looked at her and said, "You want to have?" So of course, she's like, no. And he got upset and he dragged her into the bedroom and started assaulting her. Then dragged her into the bathroom to wash off all the DNA evidence and then strangled her. Then filled the tub up with water so it looked like she had accidentally drowned, fully clothed. The case went cold. Then we have a woman named Audrey who moved to Charlotte so that she could look for opportunities. She had gotten a job as a manager at a Taco Bell. So one day she doesn't show up for her shift. So when the Taco Bell managers and all the other employees kept calling the police to do a wellness check, every time that they would drive by Audrey's apartment, her car was parked there just collecting dust. But when they call her, she's not picking up the phone. The police finally decide, we gotta do something about it. They get the maintenance man to help them open up the unit, and they realize that she is dead inside. She had been strangled with her own bra and a shirt. Then we have a woman named Michelle Stinson who also was working, you guessed it, at Taco Bell. So she ends up not coming into her shift. People were worried, but specifically one of her friends was supposed to come over and he had knocked on the door. He could hear the kids inside, but that was it. Michelle wasn't coming to the door. So he's about to head out when the kid runs out of the back door around the house and goes up to the front and says, "Please help mommy, she's sleeping in the kitchen." So he goes in through the back door with this child and he walks into the kitchen and it's just covered in. Michelle had been viciously multiple times. She had been strangled and she had obviously been assaulted. There was no signs of forced entry, nothing. So he runs out of the house because Michelle's phone line had been cut. They go to the neighbor's house and they call for the police, and they called it a cold case essentially. Henry would later claim that he went to Michelle's place to demand from her, and she had told him that she was feeling sick, so she couldn't. And he says, "You're sick? Well, show me the prescription medicine." And she said, No, I'm just taking like Advil or something." And he got so upset by that because he said, "Then you're not really sick." So he dragged her into the kitchen where he assaulted her and then stabbed her to death. So while the police weren't really talking about a serial killer on the loose, the town definitely was, because most of these disappearances and most of these murders were happening in the East Charlotte area, which is heavily populated by Black Americans. So there was so much public outrage. So many people were like, we need to do something about it, that the city said, we'll just appoint a black man as the lead investigator. You good now? Bye. So they didn't put in more resources, and thankfully around that time the killings did stop. So all of the outrage just kind of boiled down until Shauna's mom had come forward and she had decided to have a press conference. She also had an open letter to the killer. She asked the killer to put a stop to these senseless murders because look at these loved ones who were tearing people apart. So it was heartbreaking in so many ways. And it didn't work because almost the next day there was another victim. And this was practically on the 1-year anniversary of Shauna's murder. There was a woman by the name of Vanessa Mack who was murdered in her own apartment. Vanessa's sister worked at a Taco Bell. So she was actually found in her apartment by her mother-in-law. So anyway, she comes to pick up the kid and the door is open and she's like, okay, that's weird. Why would you not lock the doors? So she walks in and the first thing that she sees is the 4-month-old child sitting on the couch. So she's screaming for Vanessa. No answer. So she ends up opening the door into Vanessa's bedroom, and she said that the first thing that she saw were Vanessa's legs dangling off the bed, and she immediately knew that there was no turning back because her feet and legs, they were gray and lifeless. And when she flipped Vanessa over, she saw that she was dead and she had been assaulted, and strangled. Then another woman was killed. Her name was Brandy, and her husband, Lamar, was at work that day. She was alone with their 1-year-old son and just living her best life. But Lamar gets home and the door is unlocked. So his heart sinks to his bottoms and he starts rushing in, and the first person he checks on is his son, who was gasping for air. He had a shirt tied tightly around his neck. So Lamar unties the shirt, saves his son's life, then rushes over to Brandy, and she was turned over face down on the bed. And when he turned her over, I mean, it was too late. She had died. The police get there. They start investigating. They realize that a couple of Brandy's bank cards were missing, so they start searching her bank accounts, and one of them had been used at an ATM. They get the grainiest footage from this ATM. They were like, yeah, that's a black man, and he's wearing a gold cross earring. So that's the two things that he got out of it. So they still had no leads, right? And as they're working on it, they hold a press conference or a group meeting with the 9 homicide detectives, because there were only 9. They were really worried because the press was after them at this point. And then they get a call. Another body had been found in the same apartment complex as Brandy, and her name was Betty, and she worked at a Bojangles. She was found like all the other women. She was found assaulted and strangled. They did find her car that was dumped in a parking lot somewhere, and they scoured the inside and the outside of her car, but they didn't find anything until they had found a partial print, and it would later match Henry's. So it's said that Henry confessed to killing Betty before he killed Brandy. His initial plan was to go to Brandy's house and be let in, but when he had gone a little bit too early, and Lamar was still home. So then he went down into the next apartment, or like a couple apartments later, and that was Betty. He knew Betty, so Betty let him into the apartment. He killed Betty, then went back to Brandy, and then murdered her. So they matched Henry to the crime because they had his palm print in the DNA database, because he had been arrested for multiple different charges of shoplifting. They did not release his name to the public because they didn't want to tip off Henry. They just started a massive search for this guy, but it was too late because he had struck again. An 18-year-old deli worker by the name of Deborah was murdered in her own apartment. So she had been viciously like over 40 times. And later Henry would say, well, he had to do that because he found out that she carries a knife in her purse. So there was a tip that came in that said that a man was suspiciously hiding in an abandoned apartment, and it was only about 1.5 miles away from Deborah's place. So they think that it might be Henry. They show up, guns a-blazing, and it was him. They arrest him without incident. He was incredibly calm, incredibly cocky. He just felt like the police had nothing on him. But then they confront him with the evidence that they found his palm print on one of the victim's cars, on the trunk. And that is when he just calmly starts confessing to all the murders. He confessed to 9 murders in total. So we had the Taco Bell killings, is kind of what they were referred to. And then we had another situation where he confessed to the murder of a crush that he had before he had moved to Charlotte. Then we had another situation where the police, okay, this beats me, okay? There was a woman by the name of Valencia, and she was found murdered in her apartment. Well, they thought that it wasn't murder. Her friend comes over and sees smoke coming out of her apartment. So they call the fire department, and there was a can of beans that was on the stove. Now here's the peculiar thing. A lot of the place was like drenched in stuff like beverages, so those are like accelerants. And imagine they find a body who was completely charred, and there was evidence that they were soaked in. There was no soot in their throat, which means if you're alive breathing in the smoke, there's going to be soot in your throat. Yeah. There was also no carbon monoxide or something in their lungs, but they said it was an accidental death. And it wasn't until he had written her name down along with the list of his other victims that they were like, wait a minute. So he was found guilty of 9 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to death. Now he has been constantly trying to appeal this sentence, saying that he was coerced into a confession and he did not actually commit any of these crimes. He did end up marrying a prisoner in prison. He is still sitting on death row to this day. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!